Good evening, everybody. My name is Rafael Guzman. I am one of the co-chairs to the Glencoe Council for Inclusion and Community. We are the uh, village council that is sponsoring this event that we're having here today. For those that don't know, the Glencoe Council for Inclusion and Community was originally named the Human Relations Forum. It was created by ordinance in 1997. And it's a couple of name changes, but now we're known as the Glencoe Council for Inclusion and Community. The council encourages understanding and respect, acknowledges the value of diversity in the community, and encourages openness in the village to all persons regardless of race, color, gender, age, religion, disability, natural origin, sexual orientation, marital status, personal status, military discharge status, socioeconomic or housing status. In a nutshell, it is our goal to make Glencoe a more welcome and inclusive community, to make it in smaller words. In total, we have 12 members. We meet the first Wednesday of every month. Those meetings are open to the public, and we encourage the public to please attend. If you have questions, please submit them prior to that meeting. If there are ideas that someone would like to share in regards to perhaps a future village hall meeting such as this, or a speaker series, or a subject for a special meeting of the council, we highly encourage the public to come to one of our meetings, please, and share that information. Tonight, we're very fortunate to have a moderator, Ms. Amber Bond, as well as the panelists. But we do have to announce that Emily Mizell, who was scheduled to be a panelist, has been forced to withdraw this evening due to a death in the family. So we send her our condolences and prayers. And through a slight miracle, we owe a gratitude and a humongous thanks to Kyle Moses, who will be filling in as one of the panelists. After the panelists have had an opportunity to give their presentations, there will be a Q&A session. You can raise your hand via the Zoom function to be called on, and from there, the questions will be asked.
Who's calling me? You could call me.
Due to the time constraints that we have, we are limiting the questions per person to 3 minutes maximum. So if you do have a question, please be cognizant that it is a 3-minute max time limit, so that way everyone can have an opportunity to speak, and the presenters can actually get out of here in a reasonable hour. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce our moderator, Ms. Amber Bond. She is a licensed clinical professional counselor and clinical director of the Family Service of Glencoe. Family Service of Glencoe's mission is to promote a stronger community by meeting individual and family needs through services that identify, prevent, and resolve social and emotional problems. Amber supervises the clinical offerings at Family Service Glencoe and is the first point of contact of information about clinical services. Their offices are located near downtown off of Park Avenue. They also have, I believe, an office in Village Hall. So without further delay, and so you guys can stop hearing me talking, I will now pass it over to Amber. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I'm new to FSG. I've been here just since June, and it's been so lovely to get to know Glencoe and all the different things that make it such a really unique and wonderful community, and committees like this are a big part of that. So I'm going to introduce our 3 presenters, and they're each going to speak a little bit about, they all have prepared remarks. I think we have maybe at least one PowerPoint, and then we'll do our Q&A. So I'm going to start with Danny Chitwood. She serves as the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for UCP Seguin of Greater Chicago. She holds a master's degree in social work from the University of Illinois and is currently a PhD candidate at Concordia University, Chicago, where she is pursuing a doctorate in organizational leadership. Danny has worked in the disability profession her entire career. Previous to her position at UCP Seguin, she served as the Director of Community Engagement and DEI Chair at Special Olympics, Illinois. Danny resides in Oak Park, Illinois, with her husband of 21 years, Michael Chitwood, and their amazing 7-year-old. His name is Cruz. Thank you so much for being here, Danny.
Thank you for having me. Are we continuing with the introductions, or should I go ahead and get started?
I think let's going to go ahead and give your presentation, and then I'll just introduce each presenter before they give their remarks.
Okay. Do I have screen sharing capabilities? I do. Okay. All right. Thank you so much for inviting me today. Again, my name is Danny Chitwood, and I'm so excited to be here and represent UCP Seguin. I wanted to give you a little bit of background on who we are. We are an organization that serves individuals with intellectual disabilities, both children and adults. We have the opportunity to touch over 10,000 people during the calendar year, and we have 76 homes and several programs that we focus on. So UCP Seguin believes that all people, regardless of ability, deserve to achieve their potential, advance their independence, and act as full members of the community. So we stop at nothing to provide life skills training, assistive technology, meaningful employment, and a place to call home for people with disabilities, as well as specialized foster care for children. Our goal: to live life without limits for people with disabilities. Now, before I go ahead, I wanted to preface the next few slides with something. You're going to see 4 different individuals. There's going to be some obvious things about them and some things that aren't going to be very obvious to you. The first gentleman that you see is one that's in a wheelchair. You are able to determine by viewing him that he has some form of a disability. The next gentleman is wearing sunglasses and using a walking cane. You are able to determine from this visual that he has some sort of vision impairment. Now look at this adorable little boy with the mischievous smile and kind eyes. You aren't able to tell that he has a disability, but he does in fact have autism. And this beautiful young woman with the killer abs and great smile, she also has a disability. She has cerebral palsy. And I wanted to show you these images for a reason. Sometimes you can determine what a disability is by visual, but sometimes you can't. And let's get into the definition of what a disability actually is. A disability is any condition of the body or mind that makes it more difficult for the person with the condition to do certain activities and interacts with the world around them. Now, who is impacted? In the US, 1 in 4 adults have a disability. 2 in 5 adults age 65 or older have a disability. And disability greatly impacts American Indian and Alaskan Natives at a 3 in 10 rate, followed by Black people at a 1 in 4 rate, and white people at a 1 in 5 rate. In 2019, 3% of residents in Glencoe disclosed that they have a disability. Now, globally, 15% of the global population has a disability. That amounts to about 1 billion people around the world. 2 to 4% of those people experience significant difficulties in functioning. Now, there are a few disability dimensions that I want to discuss. Impairment in a person's body structure or function or mental functioning. Examples include loss of limb, loss of vision, or memory loss. Activity limitation, such as difficulty seeing, hearing, walking, or problem solving. And participation restrictions in normal daily activities, such as working, engaging in social recreational activities, and obtaining healthcare and preventative services. Now, there are several classifications of disabilities, but I wanted to hone in on 4 of them. They include intellectual, developmental, physical, psychiatric, and neurological. Intellectual/developmental disability is a disability characterized by significant limitations in both intellectual functioning and in adaptive behavior, which covers many everyday social and practical skills. This disability originates before the age of 22. And a person living with ID or DD has usually experienced some impact on their ability to learn, to reason, to problem solve, and live independently. Now, there are various types of intellectual disabilities, and I wanted to list a few here. So just know this is not an exhaustive list, including autism, Down syndrome, Fragile X syndrome, and fatal alcohol syndrome. And there are varying causes to obtaining a developmental or intellectual disability that include genetic disorders, complications during pregnancy and birth, and toxic exposure during childhood. And this condition is usually lifelong. Characteristics can be speech delays, limited social cues, and limited cognitive understanding. There are 6.5 million people in the US that have an intellectual and developmental disability, and 1 to 3% of the global population is impacted. And when it comes to physical disability, it's a condition that substantially limits one or more basic physical activities in life, i.e., walking, climbing stairs, reaching, carrying, or lifting, anything to do with the physical body. There are limitations. Causes may include hereditary or congenital issues, where a person has been born with a physical disability or developed one due to inherited genetic problems, and they have suffered an injury at birth or has issues with their muscles. Acquired, meaning that it could be due to an accident, infection, or disease, or as a side effect of a medical condition. An example will include Marka Bristow, she's passed on now, but she is the former CEO of Access Living. And she had a diving accident and became paralyzed from that accident. And because of her work in the disability community, she was one of the individuals that helped to push forward the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. And many of us know who Christopher Reeve was, Superman. He also had an accident that left him paralyzed. Other examples include epilepsy, multiple sclerosis, muscular dystrophy, spina bifida, and a stroke. Psychiatric is also known as mental illness, mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of the major life activities of an individual, such as learning, working, and communicating. There are a wide range of conditions that are considered to be psychiatric on the psychiatric auspice, including PTSD, anxiety disorders, eating disorders, and other psychiatric conditions. Some of the causes of psychiatric disabilities, are trauma, biochemical imbalances, and you may hear some people in the medical profession talk about the imbalance of serotonin or norepinephrine, and that has to do with the imbalance, the biochemical imbalance listed here. Highly stressful life experiences. When I first got into my career, I worked with an individual that witnessed their child being killed on the playground, and they were never the same. And other genetic and biological and social factors. While likely it takes a combination of several of these factors to produce a serious psychological disability, researchers are still working to discover specific causes to these conditions. And in order to determine if there is a psychiatric disability present, there must be a psych evaluation that's conducted. You know, sometimes people tend to observe someone and say, well, I think they have this, or I think they have that. Honestly, that should be left up to a trained medical professional. Clinical depression. It's considered to be a psychiatric disability under the Americans with Disability Act of 1990. It's characterized by persistently depressed mood or loss of interest in activities, causing significant impairment in daily life, also called major depressive disorder. The persistent feeling of sadness or loss of interest that characterizes major depression can lead to a range of behavioral and physical symptoms. These may include changes in sleep, appetite, energy level, concentration, daily behavior, or self-esteem. Depression can also be associated with suicide. So I want to be clear that this goes beyond having one acute bad day or a bad couple of days. This is something that is going on for a very long time, and these symptoms present themselves. Possible causes include a combination of biological, psychological, and social sources of distress. And again, a psychological evaluation must be conducted to determine if a person should be diagnosed with clinical depression. Clinical depression is the leading cause of disabilities for individuals between the ages of 15 to 44. 17.3 million adults are impacted by clinical depression, or 7.1% of the population 18 and older in the US, and 3.8% of the global population 18 and older have been diagnosed with clinical depression. 18 to 29-year-olds represent the highest number of individuals diagnosed, and 1.9 million children have been diagnosed with clinical depression in the US. Clinical depression is more prevalent in women than in men, and adults with clinical depression are 64% more likely to develop coronary artery disease. Let's discuss neurological disabilities. This is sometimes referred to as neurologic disorders. It involves damage to the nervous system that results in some mental or bodily function loss. This type of disability can be caused by infections, heart attack, genetic disorders, or lack of oxygen. Symptoms may include paralysis, muscle weakness, poor coordination, slurred speech, and loss of sensation. Examples of neurological disabilities include chronic headaches, epilepsy, strokes, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's, and ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. Now let's discuss invisible disabilities. If you remember the two latter photos at the top of this presentation that I showed you, these are examples of individual disabilities, and they are a mental, physical, mental, or neurological condition that is not visible from the outside, yet can limit or challenge a person's movements, senses, or activities. Typically, chronic illnesses and conditions that significantly impair normal activities of daily living. Because of the invisibility, there may be a lack of understanding from the surrounding community. This, in turn, may cause a person that lives with the invisible disability to become withdrawn and battle lower self-esteem. There is the assumption that the person with the invisible disability is lazy and not trying hard enough, when in fact, their condition is prohibiting them from executing a part that is expected of them. I want to
Danny,
talk
I
about,
just want to give you the like a time check. We
Okay,
have
go
about
ahead.
5 minutes left for your
Okay.
presentation. Thanks.
Got it. Now, with disability disclosure in the workplace, 39% of people that have a disability will disclose information to their manager. The numbers continue to decrease with various positions in the workplace. So these folks may disclose to that person that works closest to them, but with someone like HR, the numbers dwindle down to 21%, or with coworkers that that don't have a pull on how staff's performance, those numbers dwindle down even further. And sometimes some have no choice but to disclose, especially if it's visible. And there are a myriad of reasons why people do not disclose, including they fear teasing or harassment. They worry that the relationships with their coworkers will change. And many express concerns that their managers may see them as lazy or less capable, and that their career progress will stall as a result. And there are several myths and facts about disabilities. And there are a few here, but I'll focus on the top two. People with disabilities are brave and courageous. The fact is that adjusting to a disability requires adapting to a lifestyle, not bravery and courage. They're people. They figure out what needs to be done to be successful, and they do it. And people with disabilities are more comfortable with, quote, their own kind, which is absolute nonsense. In the past, grouping people with disabilities in separate schools and institutions reinforced this misconception. Today, many people with disabilities take advantage of new opportunities to join mainstream society. Grouping people with their own kind is called segregation, and we've done a lot to do away with this notion. The fact is, people with disabilities are people. People with disabilities have wants, needs, desires, just like anyone else, and we need to treat them as such. And thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Danny. That was amazing. And there was a lot of information there. If you have questions for Danny, we're going to have time for Q&A at the end. So please feel free to write down your questions. You can also put them in the chat and they will get to me in writing if you want to make sure you get that thought out before we move on. And then we'll come back at the end. Now I am thrilled to introduce Damien. Damien Buckman is the founder of Milwaukee, Wisconsin's Ramp Up Movement and the founder of the Ability Center and the Wisconsin Adaptive Sports Association. He is a two-time survivor of childhood bone cancer who has overcome 27 knee replacements and revisions since he was 13. A physically active father with an ambulatory disability, Damien makes it possible for his community to play together. Damien, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, Amber, thank you so much for having me all the way on the Zoom land from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm a little bit of a looser person, so I'm going to take this a little bit light for everybody, but also talk about, why am I here and what kind of message do I deliver and why does it matter? A couple of logistics. I am a two-time survivor of childhood bone cancer, and I've had 27 knee replacements and revisions on both of my legs since I was 13 years old. And I have found my place at times to sometimes be a wheelchair user, sometimes be with crutches, sometimes be with cane. And my ability, if you will, is constantly in motion and moving at all times. And then that experience as a almost 29-year survivor now of childhood cancer has also led me into a world where many kids who survive cancer, or many people who have a life event such as a disease or accident or simply the aging process, puts us all in a position of what I like to reference us as tabs. So everybody on this call is technically belongs to one demographic that we talk about, and we call that tabs, and it stands for temporarily able-bodied. So Danny really already kind of alluded to this idea that, simply the act of aging puts us in a position that at some point we're all going to need greater access, period. It's inescapable. The possibility of an accident or a traumatic event. And then, of course, for me, it was disease at the age of 13 when I acquired my initial ambulatory disability. At some point, doctors, and from my experience at a camp with a kid with cancer, has told me that I'm probably going to be a bilateral above knee amputee, like Lieutenant Dan, for those of us who may have seen Forrest Gump and know what I'm referencing. At some point, I may be a bilateral above knee amputee, which on certain days is going to put me in a wheelchair all day long, for the entirety or maybe for the rest of my life. And what I've realized is that the community around me, and for all of those other survivors I know from my childhood cancer camp that have acquired disabilities that range from intellectual disabilities or developmental disabilities due to treatment or brain tumors, or we could talk about, again, amputees or paralyzations from spinal tumors. It really runs the gamut. Blindness from neuroblastoma, which is a cancer of the eyes and the retina. And so it can cause a multitude of disabilities. But I think if I leave you with anything tonight, it's for you to stay focused in that idea that at any given time, this is the one diverse demographic that we could belong to on any given moment. So focus on that idea of temporarily able-bodied. I also have sat on and continue to sit on the Milwaukee County Commission for People with Disabilities. And like this committee, I sit on that for my local city of Wauwatosa, called Wauwatosa Citizens for People with Disabilities. So I'm on a couple of different community committees as well, where we're constantly having this conversation of how are we inclusive in all spaces, just like you guys are talking about right now. But one of the things that I kind of want to bring up and share with you guys, if I can, just for a couple of visuals, is just to kind of come right off of, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing. So to really touch on the same space and kind of take off of where Danny was, we talk a lot about ableism a little bit, and just what is ableism? So it's a set of beliefs or practices that often rest on the assumption that people with disabilities need to be quote unquote fixed, just to kind of shorten that up. And I think that that's one of the biggest problems that I see, is that we assume that people with disabilities are broken. And the able-bodied public generally has the assumption, again, that they need to be fixed. That's not generally or often the case. It's more that they need to be given an adaptive opportunity that we're not currently presenting them. I am the founder of this organization, the Ability Center. And just to sum that up, our goal is building communities where all abilities are provided a universal opportunity for health, wellness, and recreation. When you think about your town, you think about Glencoe, you think about the areas around you, we do a great job of providing people with disabilities these days an awesome 9-to-5 experience in a lot of cases. And I will say this, the DEI space that has been so focused in the last 5 years has been a wonderful movement to allow people with disabilities to raise their hand and say, hey, but what about me? I'm part of that diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I'm not at your table in your business resource group or in these kind of community forums. You forgot about us in that DEI space. So sometimes some people put it right on it, but I like to call it DEI plus A. A lot of people are starting to include the A, the ability piece of it. So it's really important that we're also providing a space for people to play, a space for people to recreate, a space for people to be included in their community after 5 o'clock. And Danny hit it on the head already. 26% of Americans report a disability, 1 in 4, and we're all going to be there. So if your community works for you today and you're able-bodied, you should be asking yourself, if I have an accident, if I become temporarily disabled, even for a moment, if I, because of an injury or other, and as I age, are all the things I enjoy in Glencoe still going to be accessible to me when I'm 70, when I'm 80? Am I going to be able to get in the door? Am I going to be able to get to the waterfront? Am I going to be able to play on the playground? Am I going to be able to access it with my grandchildren? Those are a lot of questions that we should be asking ourselves, because often if something works for people with disabilities, it works for everybody. At the Ability Center, we have these 3 primary pillars, but probably the one that relates most to you guys in Glencoe to think about is this ramp up pillar called universal community that we have. And what we did recently is we created really the most accessible beach in the country at Bradford Beach in Milwaukee. For the first time, this is my friend and board member, John Haupt. For the first time in 25 years as a person with MS, he was able to access Lake Michigan. The first time he was able to put his toes in there since he was in his late 30s. Everybody should have that same access to the waters of Lake Michigan, the beach and the sand of, for us, it's Bradford Beach, but there's lots of beaches across Lake Michigan in all of the states, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, et cetera, that people should be able to access, and often they can't. And so what we did was not only build a permanent ramp that gets people down to the beach, but there's a pathway that takes them all the way 200 feet from the top of Lincoln Memorial Drive to the waterfront and actually be able to put their toes in the sand. But we also didn't stop there. I think what's really important to understand is, as communities, we shouldn't be penalizing people because they have a disability. In most cases, at most beaches across the country and even on the ocean shores, you have to pay money to rent a beach chair so that you can access the beach. So essentially what we're then saying as a community, or that tourism venue or whatever, that you're being penalized because you have a disability while everybody else can access this beach for free, you cannot. You need to rent a beach wheelchair. So in fact, we have 4 beach wheelchairs here in Milwaukee at Bradford Beach that people get to check out for free for their use, that can take them not just down the path of the top of the beach at Lincoln Memorial Drive for us and down to the shore of the water at Lake Michigan there, 200 feet, but they can really access A to Z. And that's another space that we talk about that we think people are missing. We think people often miss this idea that just because ADA provides access into a building, we have to be asking ourselves, what's the opportunity once we get in that space? Do we have an equitable opportunity to access 10%, 50%, 90%, 100% of the space, or can we just get through the door? And I think a lot of times people are missing that piece as well. So that's why we said it's great to have a ramp. It's great to have a mat that takes them to the water, but they should also be able to access the beach A to Z like everybody else can, not just A to B. And so it's a great opportunity to have that. And also, I'll touch this last thing. The bottom picture, you'll see a gentleman in a day chair with a blue shirt on. His name is Tim Mcnakowski. Tim was actually injured at Bradford Beach when he was 18 and became a quadriplegic. On the 30th anniversary of the ADA, when we opened Bradford Beach, when he retired, was the first time he was able to access Bradford Beach again. Now that's a great story and that's heartwarming, but what I want to point out is that's incredibly sad that it took him nearly 45 years before he could get on the sands of Lake Michigan again, even though the ADA was passed in 1990. Until 30 years after the ADA was Tim able to access the beach. Those kind of things, to me, to us, into this ramp up universal community piece are just not okay. And that's what we're doing to improve it. I'll finally say this in that space, that when we think about people with disabilities, we have to remember that the person with the disability comes surrounded by able-bodied people. You can see behind me, this is my wife in the picture. You can't really see the glare. These are all of my children. I have 3 perfectly able-bodied boys that want to play. And more importantly, I want to play with them. And when we don't give access to something like the beach or an ice skating rink or bikes or the park, the playground, et cetera, in our community, what we're really doing is sidelining dad and then losing opportunities for our able-bodied kids. You know, or again, vice versa. If a dad has a disability or a parent has a disability, a mom, and they have able-bodied kids, we're often leaving the able-bodied kids out from an experience too, because the parent with a disability or a limitation can't keep them safe. And so it's really important to think in the spaces of not just the person with the disability, but the person with the disability comes surrounded by able-bodied people as well. So let's just say this last thing here in this space. When I think about disability, I don't really think about the dis side of it, which is a little gimmicky, but because of this. An ability is a talent, skill, or proficiency in a particular arena. So if we, again, look at disability or ability through that lens and put on some different goggles, there are a lot of people with all kinds of disabilities that have a significant talent, a significant skill, or are very proficient in arenas in which you are not, as someone who is considered able-bodied or typically developing neurologically. An example I love to give in this space is my niece, actually, who is on the autism spectrum. My sister was given no promises of any kind of success for my niece or nephew who are both on the spectrum. Turns out my niece is at Columbia College in Chicago on a scholarship for music and for singing, and she plays the cello. And what's really crazy about this story for me, for her, is that she actually smells notes when she hears music. So her ability to conduct music and create her own music is extraordinarily proficient And it looks back at if we can avoid the conversation and not really focus on the autism and focus on my niece's abilities, we actually realize that she's full of them. And so it's another reason to just think, what are the skills that these people can deliver, or anybody, as we look away from the disability and into really the ability space of what they can do. And this actually, I do want to share this. This is, and I'm already giving it away, but this is the last thing that I like to share with people is we often think about when we talk about disabilities, what people can't do versus what they can do. And Anise on here will recognize this gentleman. And I usually ask people if you can tell me what this person can't do. All right. And we won't get into it right now with everybody and ask for responses, but we'll talk about it later. It turns out this is a former camper of mine. His name is Tommy Carroll. Tommy Carroll is blind. Tommy can't see. And looking at this picture, you can't necessarily tell. Tommy is so blind, like he literally has prosthetic eyes. The first time I met Tommy was on a plane to Park City, Utah. Tommy walked down the entire aisle, sat down in between in the middle chair between myself and my co-counselor named David Michael. He did all of that without us realizing that he was blind. When Tommy sat down, he looked over at David and I as he sat in the middle seat and he went, prosthetic, prosthetic. And we had no clue he was blind because he's that proficient with his, again, limitation or disability. And instead of thinking about what Tommy can't do, I like to show people what Tommy can do and focus again in that space. Tommy plays the drums in a band and conducts music. Tommy has run marathons, including the Chicago Marathon. And Tommy skates skate parks and has skated with Tony Hawk because he can do that even though he can't see anything. And he had a funny joke where his favorite time to go to skate parks is at night because he can't see anyway, but nobody's there. All somebody needs to do for Tommy is walk him through a skate park. He feels his way. And the next thing you know, he will skate the whole park and the entire pool and everything. It's pretty extraordinary. So if we can, again, get out of that space about thinking about what people with disabilities can't do versus what they can, you guys are going to excel as a community. We here in Milwaukee, and with our ramp up model, we've not only ramped up Bradford Beach, but we have ramped up Veterans Park with hand cycles so everybody can bike our lakefront regardless of their limitations or ability. And then we also added ice skating sleds at a park called Red Arrow Park here. So now everybody can actually ice skate as well. And so nobody's left out. The other thing is we also don't do that in a manner of come on down on Saturday because we're going to be there with our equipment. It's really important that if the space is open to the able-bodied public, that space is also open to those with disabilities or limitations so that they can play together in your community equally. I leave it at that, and I welcome conversations and Q&A at the end. I'm an open book, but at the end of the day, why I know this stuff, why I'm passionate about this stuff is because I survived at 13 what I wasn't supposed to survive, and people didn't even think I would see my 16th birthday. So I'm here, I'm alive, I'm doing what I can to honor my survivorship, but I live it every day in and out and know that my road could be even more disabled in my future than it is today.
Thank you so much, Damien. And we've gotten at least one comment in the chat thanking you for the stirring personal examples in your presentation. And I absolutely agree. If you have comments or thoughts, feel free to put them in the chat for all of the attendees. You can also, we'll have an opportunity to raise hands at the end for Q&A. Now I need to preface my introduction of Kyle, first of all, to thank you so much for pitching in at the last minute. Kyle is has saved the day. We promised you 3 presenters. We have 3 presenters, and we're thrilled to have Kyle. Kyle Moses identifies as an empowered person with disabilities. He's been a disability advocate for all of his adult life. Living with various disabilities for the entirety of his life has shaped his understanding of life. He has created and participated in 2 different disability leadership academies and was recently hired as a job coach for people who have intellectual and/or developmental disabilities. Kyle has various graduate degrees that focus on disability studies and education. Kyle, thank you so much for being here. We're thrilled to have you.
Oh, thanks so much, Amber. I really appreciate it. Let's just pull this up. So Can everyone hear me?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Yes, I can hear you.
Awesome. So I've been recently told that my greatest flaw is that I'm too idealistic. Guilty as charged. I'm a man who used to live on the North Shore with my family and now lives in the Pacific Northwest, where I work as an advocate and job coach for people with disabilities. I self-describe myself again as an empowered person with disabilities, which means that I look at my disabilities as a way to push for change for me and others who have notoriously been marginalized. I was born with visual impairment, a weakened right side of my body, as well as a learning disability. My earliest memory was having a very bright light be shown in my eyes. I had my first surgery very soon after on those same eyes. This early experience was full of trauma and uncertainty for both me as well as my family. This corrective surgery temporarily worked. Early on, I had an IEP, an individualized education plan, and was placed in remedial classes on and during my educational experience. I was placed in various resource rooms where I was taken out of the main classroom and placed in a separate classroom to work on homework and other social skills. Other students in my main classroom would wonder, where did Kyle go? When all of a sudden I would disappear and I'd have to come up with some sort of, catchy statement. I went to the bathroom, or I had to go do something that didn't, wasn't in the classroom. And they would usually not have that be a problem. Many of these resource teachers I had early on didn't have disabilities themselves, which made this resource time a place to connect with other students that had disabilities to learn how to live our best lives in school. One of my first advocacy experiences was when my mom wanted me to attend my when my mom wanted me to attend my own IEP meetings, where I saw the behind the scenes of how the school was making decisions or recommendations for me. I saw the behind the scenes aspects and was able to see input or have input with my mom in ways that worked for me or didn't work for me. This was a very impactful moment in my life because it allowed me to assert a certain amount of agency in my own future. I consciously was able to help myself throughout the very complicated educational structure in a way that, especially during that time, was rare to see. During grade school, I was bullied because I was viewed as different. My parents thought that me joining some sort of athletic pursuit would lessen the horrible impact of me being bullied. After some investigating, my folks found a martial arts teacher on the North Shore where I started taking private lessons from him. Within 6 months to a year of private lessons, I was like a different kid. I had a different confidence that I belonged and that I wasn't going to be pushed around by bullies. This was a real game changer for me because it was the first time I knew I had belonged somewhere. This external confidence propelled me to find more success in school and feel successful despite having to ward off the peers and find success. In the end, I earned a first-degree black belt in Japanese-style karate and have traveled to national and international competitions. When I bring up this fact to many non-disabled peers, they cock their heads in a very strange way, as if I'm lying or embellishing the truth of my accomplishments, as if I had handed this as if this was handed to me because someone felt sorry or they were giving me some sort of gift. This is so insulting, but not surprising. I have realized that no matter what I do, there will always be conscious or unconscious bias that I didn't really accomplish what I said I did. As if there is a constant asterisk associated with my life and accomplishments as a whole. This is a very common experience that many people with disabilities face in their lives because of the various stereotypes and stigmas that often are associated with us. I'm here to unequivocally let you know that nothing is handed to me as a gift or charity during my martial arts career, which built actually real and substantial confidence in me moving forward. College was another place where I was able to continue to work on this advocacy for both myself and others. In graduate school, I was able to connect my experiences to others who had various marginalized identities and find ways to get beyond that and empower ourselves and connect a variety of differing groups that have all been marginalized. So sort of see the through line is my point. This really spoke to me. Things to think about. What makes you as a person feel whole in your life? A good job that pays a living wage, a spouse, kids, healthcare, respect, being able to easily get from one place to another, etc. People with disabilities should have those same aspirations and more to the point they should want those just like everyone else. Being more equitable starts with a collective understanding that we are all better together than separate. Public spaces are meant, as Damien pointed out, to everyone to enjoy, not just for a select group of people, but for all organizations, able-bodied, disabled, etc., that want to utilize them. Everyone wants to live their best life, and people with disabilities are no different. Even with my various advanced knowledge and degrees I have earned, I just have a few ways. Sorry, I just found and was hired my first full-time job ever. Yet there are still some accommodations that need to be worked out because I don't drive. Yet my employer was willing to still be there and hire me, knowing this fact. So there we are. Employment has been a very tricky situation to solve for me because I often am over and or underqualified for various positions, but cannot solve the accommodations rubric or situation, the Rubik's Cube. Thus, I often settle for very part-time work and work that doesn't necessarily fit my interest or background. Why do accommodations have to be viewed as a problem? Most accommodations actually don't cost anything at all, aside from a little creativity, which is something that people with disabilities have had to deal with for every moment of their lives. I will leave you with this. Think about how the residents of Glencoe can make your schools, common areas, workplaces, and common spaces and places more accessible for all, and make a call to your representatives to voice your opinion so that Glencoe can be the more accessible for everyone to live their best lives and works and have that work for everyone. Thanks very much.
Kyle, thank you so much. That was so personal and moving, and I really appreciate having you here to tell that story. We'll get on to questions for the panelists in just a minute, but we have a special guest who's gonna have a few words before we go on to questions. So just a reminder, I have gotten at least one question in the chat, so feel free to send those. if you want to do it by chat, or we can do the hand raising. But now I am gonna first introduce Sierra Shum. She's the manager of recreation at Northern Suburban Special Recreation Association, NSSRA. They provide year-round recreation activities for individuals with disabilities that reside in the North Shore communities, including Glencoe. NSSRA has been creating an environment of belonging through play since 1970 and have the distinction as the first special recreation association in the country. NSSRA is an extension of their partner park districts, providing quality recreation services to participants with a range of disability diagnoses throughout their lifespan. Sierra, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Amber. We're excited to have this opportunity to be a part of this group and hear the questions and just how to make Glencoe a more accessible place for individuals with disabilities. We do provide programming and services mostly to individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the Glencoe community. So if anyone is around Glencoe, you've probably seen our NSSRA buses drive through the area. We do have lots of vehicles that we take out to do recreation activities with our individuals throughout the week and nights and weekends. So really, we're kind of that collaborative with the park district so that those programs that individuals with disabilities want to participate in, we are that resource to making those programs accessible for those individuals. So in our park district setting, we do provide inclusion services. So as a special recreation agency in Illinois, inclusion services are just part of the setup of Illinois, which is great. So if a child needs some additional inclusion accommodations, we provide that staff and we train them so that they are, uniquely aware of that child's needs and create that inclusive environment, in those programs. So oftentimes it's summer camp programs or after school programs so that child can participate with their peers who don't have disabilities. And then additionally, we have our own, program guide of offerings for individuals who are looking for a more therapeutic recreation experience. So they're wanting to have a, specific schedule and have those additional accommodations through programming that meets specifically their needs. So we now have a facility in Highland Park. It's about 30,000 square feet. It's a brand newly renovated building where we do have programming here. And then part of our mission is to be out in our partner communities as much as possible. So being in facility spaces in Glenview, such as the Take If Center and, various, Glencoe Beach, various places where we can be visible in our community and have that accessibility as well. So the other piece that we also do is serving as that resource for community recreation. So we do go out to different high schools and train staff or train, prospective staff and students, as well as just being able to do some of those outreach opportunities so that we can spread awareness toward what recreation looks like for people with disabilities so that we all are able to play in our community and have those fun, inclusive experiences with community members.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Good to hear more about what NSSRA is doing. All right, so we do have a bunch of questions coming in, which is great. So I will go through the chat and start sharing them. If you have a particular panelist that you want to answer a question, feel free to put that in your question. If you want to direct it at someone specifically. Otherwise, I will just read them and then any panelists who are so moved can jump in. And then if you prefer to do your question verbally, this is now the time that you can raise your hand using the Zoom feature, and we'll then call on folks. You can turn your camera on if you want, you can keep it off if you want, and do your question in real time if you don't want to use the chat. Either one is 100% welcome. So question one, so this is, and the names are getting cut off on the screen. Here we go. No, I can't see the names. So this is MF, I can only see initials. I have a friend who had a stroke a few years ago. She has partial paralysis and traumatic brain injury. She's also experiencing depression. I want to encourage her to try new things, get out of her room, learn to enjoy more activities, but I also don't want to push her too much. She has resisted all suggestions. How do I know how much is too much? What resources can I refer to in order to help her with compassion? That's a great question. And panelists, does anybody feel inspired to jump in?
I would jump in with there's a little bit to unpack there. I come from a very significant kind of recreation space, and I think Kyle touched on it himself too, of what martial arts did for him. And oftentimes when we talk about recreation and adaptive sports in that kind of space, I mean, America is a sports culture, period, end of story, right? We all play at different levels, you know, from recreation to elite. And so one of my questions would be, you know, how old this friend is, but I also would pivot that with, that doesn't really matter. What I think everybody in adaptive sports will tell you, and Kyle alluded to, and I could allude to the same, I play wheelchair basketball with a competitive team, is that it's not the actual sport that's the most important thing. It's the camaraderie and the connection amongst people who are like, that are the most important thing. And you can get an opportunity to connect to those individuals. And I have seen adaptive sports range from people who literally can only move their head in playing wheelchair bocce. It's the only thing they can do. But they are included, and there is an opportunity for them to compete, and there's an opportunity for them to play, and there's a community for them to be a part of. The SRAs in Illinois are amazing. We don't have those in Wisconsin. So everybody in the community should be looking and seeing, at least through their rec guides, that they exist and there's opportunities out there, that there's a connection. We don't have that up here. So I applaud Illinois for what they've done. So my answer, although this is long, would be, is to start there. There are people there who are always understanding, who always know how to help. And you're going to see all kinds of abilities in that room or that gym space or that whatever, when you go to participate, even therapeutic recreation, that you finally find a place where you belong and where you're included and where you can feel welcome, wanted, and comfortable. I would always encourage people to start in that space.
Sierra, did you want to add anything about the special recreation opportunities?
Yeah, speaking to what Damien said, we do. Illinois is very unique in the sense that Parks and Recreation in Illinois are a very elaborate system, and we do, especially for disability services, you know, it is a little interesting because disability services overall in Illinois tend to be a little bit splintered, where you see some doing really good positive work and then others where we really lag well behind. So if you look at like stats of Illinois and where we fall in disability services, you know, there are a lot of areas where there's substantial room for improvement, but an area that we do perform really well in is recreation. And I think that's also because recreation looks really good in the state of Illinois, just in general, with just our, you know, park district systems. So overall, you know, if you're looking for recreation services in our state, there are so many different options, whether that be through just that inclusion process of even just like looking in a local park district guide and being able to sign up for something as an adult with a disability, and then being able to get that support through a staff. You know, it's something that happens so naturally in our, you know, our system, and we're able to do that. Our biggest hurdle is typically that staffing piece, which is everyone's hurdle nowadays, but overall that system is in place and that those supports are in place. So it won't feel like something that is you know, such a hurdle or a barrier, because it, you know, we do have, you know, those accommodations right there ready to go. So we definitely have served adults before in those situations with either, you know, strokes, you know, TBIs, different things like that, where, you know, doing ceramics classes and, you know, different fitness classes, we've had individuals. And I think the biggest issue with that piece is that a lot of times adults aren't aware that this support exists. And a lot of the support we see is through children. You know, we have many children with all sorts of different diagnoses signing up for, you know, tons of different programming. But for adults, I think a lot of times it's just forgotten about, or maybe just not known. So that's definitely an option here. And it's, of course, a great accommodation that we're able to make for that inclusive piece.
Any other thoughts from the panel?
Can I just add on the other end, with respect to your friend, that this is a part of a grieving process for her. If you think about the stages of grief, you know, including denial and acceptance. Your friend is going through this right now. She's grieving who she once was and who she's coming into her own to be, and what that's going to mean for her. And if we know anything about grief, it's a ever evolving process. There's no necessarily an end to it. So it's going to take a little bit of patience for her to understand, you know, what it means to have paralysis on one side of her body, what it means to be a person that's had a stroke. And, you know, I would recommend working with some groups that support those particular diagnoses to help her through this process of grief.
I agree. I'm going to put on my mental health counselor hat for a second. And I heard that word depression in the question. And so whenever I hear depression, I want to make sure there's therapy involved. And when we're supporting grief, support groups are often one of our top referrals as therapists when there's grief involved. So I love the idea of being able to meet with a support group of folks who have had a similar experience. And then also to be able to recreate with folks as well to build a new life. So that's lovely. We have some really nice comments thanking all the presenters for their vulnerability and sharing their stories. Thank you all. I have a question here in the chat saying, thank you, Kyle. This is a Kyle question, I think. For this candid presentation. This is helping me recognize that accommodations should be discussed on a regular basis with a business, a community gathering space, etc. My question, how can one begin to advocate for more accommodations? Do we start by asking community spaces what their accommodations are? Any thoughts on that, Kyle?
Great question. So every place is different. So if you're going to a private school, for instance, if you're going to a public school, if you're going to a middle school, a parochial school, et cetera, all of those spaces have different rules and regulations. And that just makes the journey a little bit more daunting. But asking good questions, being able to have a personal relationship with your teachers or the teachers and or the staff there, counselors, psychologists, the principal, the vice principal, knowing what you're actually dealing with and what your goals are. You have to be very goal driven at that point about like what your end goal is going to look like, instead of just asking like, you know, random questions that don't necessarily have any have a point, or if they have a point, it's in the moment. So it's having that goal understanding about what you're going to actually do and where you're actually going. And so every place, like Damien had mentioned, if you're doing recreational sports, I mean, like knowing what that means, how old people need to be, what the regulations are, if there's like an issue with a uniform, for instance, all of that stuff. What are the adapting principles along with that? I mean, a variety of those things that goes into. So it's very specific into what you're looking to do, and asking good questions is really helpful, and also having a really clear understanding about the outcome of where you're actually coming from is really important as well.
Thank you, Kyle. Any other thoughts about how to begin advocating for accommodations?
Yeah, I would just add simply that when you come with solutions, you see better results. So when people often come with the ADA handbook or law book, people always find a way around that, because the way the law is written is usually good enough to get people out of the situation and say, I don't have to do that, it turns out. And that happened on a citywide standpoint here. So I would just say, if you are looking for accommodations, which everybody has the right to have and to be included, I get it, you shouldn't have to fight. But if you come with a positive, collaborative, and solution-based opportunity, people are ready to listen. If you come with a lawsuit or legalese or whatever, they're immediately to their defenses and they're going to find a way out of what you're asking for.
Collaborative problem solving sounds like a great model for these kinds of conversations.
I think if I could jump in. I think that an avenue also would be to reach out to committees or councils such as ours. The Council for Inclusion and Community exists to hear these issues. It's also an avenue in which those people who are shy or hesitant due to their own self view, you can attend these meetings. They're by Zoom and the camera's not on, but you can raise your hand, you can make your point, you can ask about or inquire as to what accommodations can be made because there's something in your community that you see needs to be addressed. And I love Damien's recommendation that you come in with a problem, maybe a proposed solution, in order to come to a mutual understanding and also a plausible solution. And I think that's what's important. But again, our council meets every month, first Wednesday of every month. You see something that you think is dividing the community or something that could be done to further include more members in our community, by all means, that's why we're there.
So on that note, we have a question about the committee meetings. The time, it sounds like, is the first Wednesday, or it's on the first Wednesday of the month, if I heard that right. There's a question about what's the specific time? How do we get the Zoom link?
Yeah, so we meet the first Wednesday of every month. It's at 5:30. And the meetings, we generate to limit it to an hour. Sometimes it is an hour and a half. The website information, as well as the agenda for each meeting, can be found at the Village of Glencoe website. You can click on the committees, and then you look for the Glencoe Council for Inclusion and Community. It will give you the calendar when we meet. It will give you the agenda for that meeting. And again, if you have questions or would like to make a public statement, you could submit that before the meeting and it can be read. We always have an opportunity for the public to address any questions or concerns that they have. It's open to the public. We are a volunteer council, and we encourage, if you want to attend, by all means, just go to the Village of Glencoe website and click on the link.
Great. Thank you. That was awesome. And the same person wants to know, how can we make these conversations more mainstream, so that it's not just folks that are already in the disability community, that it's folks from all communities, all citizens being part of the conversation. Any thoughts from the panel on that?
The other panelists may have a little bit of a different perspective, but it starts with the mainstream audience allowing for the disabled community to integrate into these conversations and allowing them to be vulnerable and allowing them to speak freely. I don't believe that, either one of the panelists used any language that would exclude the mainstream community. It's just being able to listen with an open mind and an open heart. But Damien and Kyle, you can add to that.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is I have a board member of mine on my organization had a spinal aneurysm when he was 15, and he also happens to be an African American. So he's paralyzed and a wheelchair user. And one of the comments he's always continually made is, well, now that I can get in the bathroom, that's great. That's ADA stuff. But now how do I get in the boardroom? So how do we see people with disabilities as valuable enough that they're actually decision makers at the table as well? And as we think about our DEI spaces, we also need to be intentional there. So not just on race and gender orientation, all of those things, that they're all very important, right? And in the disability sector, all of that exists as well, right? They have those identifiers as well. And so it's thinking about, when we're in those spaces of how are we more inclusive, we also think, how do we have people with disabilities engaging at this table too?
Yeah, so this is Kyle. One of my things that I look at before I go to work for a place is how many people with disabilities do they actually hire? And the last place that I actually looked into, actually, the CEO said, yes, we do hire people with disabilities. And I was like, oh, great, you know? So it's utilizing that as an understanding, as like a leveling, and like not asking, but sort of having them be sort of candid. And that goes both ways, I think. Like if they're going to be ableist, you know, right from the gate, you're like, okay, I got it. If I'm going to join this organization, I'm going to have to go uphill all the time and say ableism, ableism, ableism 101. And they're not going to necessarily like me all that much, but that's part of the advocacy situation. It's not to make people necessarily feel comfortable. And I think like fundamentally, that's a lot of what, you know, doing this work is really about. And it's not to necessarily make people uncomfortable. It's being real in the moment and finding ways, as Damien said, to be like solutions oriented and utilize and convey that in a way where people can really feel like they're not only being heard and they're not being attacked. Everyone, you know, gets so concerned about being attacked by whatever. And if you take that out of the equation and we're just in this together, there's that old saying, nothing about us without us. And that's completely what I always have said from the get-go. And another sort of leveling perspective is the difference between power over and power to. When I'm being seen to power over, I'm feeling like they're going to want to push me further down. But if I'm going to be uplifted with everyone else, that's power too. I'm taking everyone along with me and I'm along for the ride. And I think that like we have to really change that dynamic in a lot of ways of having like that top down perspective so that everyone can feel included and loved and valued just like everyone supposedly wants.
Thank you, Kyle. So again, I think I'm hearing the theme here of collaboration, and that when we make our communities inclusive, we make them better for everyone, regardless of ability. So I'm gonna, we have a question here about, and then this may just coming right off of that, how we can take stock of how we're doing as a community. How do we determine where we might be able to do better?
I think this is a different question for, you know, government in a city or community than I guess it is for the individual companies that may exist in your community or otherwise that you don't really necessarily have control over. But a way to take stock would be to look across your panels and your different committees in the community and see if there is inclusion of people with disabilities on them. I think that's pretty easy. I think when I think about the workplace, you know, you can't really control every workplace in your community, but again, you can control what happens from an entertainment standpoint, from an inclusion standpoint, from a community standpoint, outside of the general work hours. So are my recreation spaces accessible? My park spaces, you know, are community spaces inclusive? If you're having a concert, you know, at a pavilion that Glencoe might have, do you have somebody who's signing that concert for someone in your community that might be deaf? Might be an opportunity. So how can what activities, and again, thinking that DEI lens and that inclusion lens, what activities or items is the city engaged in? And are we using that lens of people with disabilities as well to ask, is this inclusive? And Kyle already said it, nothing about us without us. So as you go forward, as mistakes may have been made in the past, and we're all growing, we're all learning, and we're learning at a faster space than we ever have in a bigger space, and is to just pause and remember to be cognizant of, okay, we're about to do this new thing. Have we looked through the disability lens on this, or ask anybody else to take a look at it before we move forward? Doesn't mean don't do it. There's always a way to adapt. There's always a way to be inclusive. And that's just, again, being more intentional in that DEI space, plus the A in everything that you do.
That's amazing. And I would also, to add to that, are you asking those questions? are you engaging your population in Glencoe that's disabled? Are you doing those surveys, making those assessments? And again, including them at the table to have those discussions so you can know. To echo what Kyle and Damien said, you can't do this. You can't create an inclusive space for folks with disabilities without including them in those conversations. So ask those questions, do those surveys, include them at the table with these discussions. That's first and foremost.
Inevitably, if you try to do it without people with disabilities, you're going to end up redoing it anyway, and it's going to cost you more money on the back end to fix the problem because you didn't include them at the table to give you all the answers. So it just makes sense on the front end to bring them in and make sure it's universally inclusive, not just compliant. ADA is compliance. ADA is not necessarily inclusion. I cannot stress that enough. ADA doesn't speak to opportunity, it speaks to people getting in the door.
I'm hearing loud and clear to take off the compliance mindset and put on an inclusion mindset, which are two different things, for sure. I'm looking at the time, it's 7:16. I have a couple of very specific questions that we may be able to get to, and then I'm going to combine them. We have a question about, and this is coming right off of these, this is kind of a follow-up question. A lot of our jobs, a lot of our workplaces in Glencoe are in downtown. So what makes a downtown accessible and therefore including the workplace accessible? I guess we'll say the community, the downtown and the community accessible to workforce.
So
Well,
this is
go ahead, Kyle. You probably have a better answer than I do because I'm not very familiar with Glencoe.
So I don't know about that, but my first inclination, there's a term that actually came from architecture. It's called universal design, and it's been sort of adapted again for people with disabilities. If you just look up a universal design website, like they'll give you a lot of information about what can and can't be done or what's helpful in terms of like making tables that go up and down, for instance, giving wheels and or not wheels on chairs, giving, pads that really are helpful, dealing with technology, that type of thing. So, I mean, if you think about it from all of these different angles, like when I said in my presentation, if you think about who am I leaving out and or unintentionally maybe and or then intentionally trying to get in, it's like that kind of perception of like trying to be expansive instead of constricted.
Yeah, Kyle, your answer is way better than mine. I was just going to say that we as humans respond and react with our senses. We see a Starbucks on the corner and we go in there. If something's too hot, we don't. We put it down and allow it to cool off. If something's tacky to our touch, we remove our hands from it. You think about it from that perspective and think about people with disabilities and their senses being impacted by that. If someone can't see, what do you need to do to make sure that there are enough sounds around where they can navigate a grid system? If people can't hear, what are you doing to make sure that their sight is heightened and aware? You have to respond and react in that manner to making your downtown more accessible, and considering the fact that while people that are more able-bodied may have all of those senses working for them and sometimes take for granted, that fact, people with disabilities may have some of those senses diminished, and we need to consider that when we're building a more accessible area.
I think something else that I've also seen in some of our programming and also just in general with like the disability community is just that sometimes businesses don't necessarily think that some of this applies because they maybe haven't seen it themselves. They haven't seen something be inaccessible. They haven't seen a large population of individuals with disabilities in their establishment. And sometimes we have to question, why is that happening in the first place? It's likely because that location or your, business might not be accessible in order to allow that individual a place, of opportunity to be in the first place. So I think, the more people that become aware and are looking at the ground, seeing whether there's curb cuts, seeing where there's accessible crosswalks, seeing where the menus have large print options, whatever the form of accessibility is, the more people that are recognizing those are there and where they are not is what is going to start more of a conversation, I would say, in that mainstream, mainstream community, instead of it just being like a disability issue, because it isn't, it's a human issue for everybody to be a part of.
Boy, I think I could go on all night about this question. Something that everybody's reminding me of is like something Wauwatosa here did. We have a visually impaired organization very close to our city. And so a lot of our crosswalks have vocalization. So it lets you know what direction the walk sign is coming from. And it's got auditory for people with visual impairments. So that's something. I think about the fact that Milwaukee, to my best of my knowledge, has become the only bike share system in the municipality that includes accessible bikes. And we've got to look at that accessible bike in a different way. So there's tandem bike, a side-by-side bike, and there's a hand cycle, and there's a trike. Well, the trike works for anybody who doesn't have great balance or obesity or a multitude of things that don't allow them to ride a regular bike. So it doesn't just work for the person with a disability. And the side-by-side tandem bike is great for date night, right? Not just for people who need assistance, who, again, people who are visually impaired will use that bike with a sighted person. And so we got to understand that the value in these things that we're providing go far beyond the individual with the disability. As far as the community is concerned, and anybody who might be coming to your city to conduct business, I think one of the things you might be able to ask is in an application is, how are you going to be accessible for our community? And that doesn't mean they may or may not get a permit. They're just forced to think about it and give you guys an answer. And so we've included that in RFPs with the Milwaukee County. We've done that with them. We've said, make them answer how they're going to be an inclusive system if they're coming to the beach or the park or to be one of your vendors. And so that's something that we have implemented in Milwaukee County through the Milwaukee County Park System and Milwaukee County as a whole. So wherever you can implement those kind of questions to make people think about it, I think helps. Finally, any new business that may be coming into Glencoe, there's a great organization, if you're not familiar with it, called Disability In. And Disability In has been a wonderful organization to help people understand the value of hiring and employing people with disabilities. And significant companies in corporate America, we'll call it, not just small, across the country, have been signing on to Disability In and understanding the value and the production that people with disabilities put out on a daily basis. In fact, we often think, again, what they can't do, not what they can do. And we limit them into thinking they're not going to be able to accomplish as much, but truly they're more productive at the end of the day, because as Kyle has alluded to this whole conversation, in most times people with disabilities aren't even hired, and it's very hard to find the job. So once they get that job, they are so incredibly dedicated to showing up every day, no matter what's going on, that they become some of your best employees. So it's just another avenue to kind of, how can you give a new business coming in the resources in order to make sure that they understand how to serve people with disabilities in their community. Finally, I'll just say, whether it's Glencoe or the neighboring community, I can maybe drive to work or take public transportation as well. But again, it's always, if we want to invite people into Glencoe as a city, it's how are the rest of the ancillary parts? Everybody likes to talk about, I want to be a great city to live, to work, and to play. And work is only a third of that. So how does it work for my living, and how does this work for my play in my space that makes me want to be a part of the Glencoe community, whether that's for employment or for purchasing a home or living in the community?
Thank you all. I think we have reached the end of our time, and I am going to turn this over. This is a really great conversation, and I just want to thank everybody for being part of it. Thank you to all of the attendees for these questions. I mean, these were fantastic. This is a great discussion. And I look forward to, hearing more about Glencoe's conversation around making our community more inclusive for all people. And thank you to the committee for organizing this and bringing this fantastic panel of people together. And with that, I am going to turn this over to Raphael, I think, to wrap things up.
Thank you so much, Amber. And I can't express my gratitude to Kyle, Damien, and Danny for your time, your presentations, your words. The whole point of this was to give a platform to a community that doesn't necessarily have the chance to be heard. That's part of our goal as the council that we run. I want to spend a tremendous large thank you over to Anise Moses and Robert Young. They were part of the subcommittee that got this entire thing organized and presented. With that, we will be sending out from the village a survey, just a follow-up to ask everyone's thoughts on how this went. And again, our council meets the first Wednesday of every month. I encourage everyone to attend. And also, if there are subject matters that you would like to address or ideas you want to share, we are there for that. So with that being said, thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Be safe, be warm. And Kyle, Damien, Danny, Amber, thank you very, very much for everything you did tonight for us. I greatly appreciate that. Good night, everybody.